Hello my friends, I'm Robin. Today we are doing another round of recent reads where I talk about 10 more books that I've read recently. I'm gonna preface this by saying this one is a bit of a downer. I have gone through a little bit of a reading slump, like on and off, over the last couple of months, and I thought I was out of it because I gave like a whole bunch of 5 stars, and then I went through a period where I was just DNFing books left and right. So I am actually not gonna go in order in which I read them because then we're gonna end with just like a bunch of bad reviews. So we're actually gonna go in reverse order to the books that I read the most recently to furthest ago because those are the ones that I gave 5 stars. Let's just jump right into it. So most recently I read The Neverking by Nikki Crowe, and I ended up giving this one 4 stars. This is one of those books where you're reading it and you logically know. You're like, this is not peak literature. This is not particularly well written. This doesn't have like well-developed characters or a well-developed plot, but you cannot stop reading this book. I was like, the characters have nothing to them, but I am in this story. It is a poly type of romance between our heroine and the Lost Boys, and she is kidnapped by Peter, and everyone in the Darling family on their 18th birthday is kidnapped by Peter. And up until this point, she has always thought that her family had a history of mental illness and that on her 18th birthday, she was going to start developing the same symptoms. Turns out that Peter is real and that magic is real and the Lost Boys are real. And she wakes up on this island with the Lost Boys in this tree house, and she is kind of like pulled into their stuff. They are trying to save the island. Peter has lost his shadow and therefore he is losing his magic as well as the island's magic. She is somehow tied to this entire thing and they need to work together to try and save his shadow and save the island, and it is ridiculous but so stinking good. I don't know what it was about this story, but the entire time I was like completely invested in this book, and I have since downloaded the sequels, so I am definitely continuing on with this one. I loved it a lot. 4 stars. It's just a good time. I read Unwanted by Marley Valentine. I have read quite a few of Marley Valentine's books. I've read all of her newest stuff. This was her latest release. I ended up giving this one 3 stars, which is the lowest I've ever given one of her books. I think I've given all of her books 5 stars up until this point. This one was just, it wasn't everything I wanted. In this one, we are following a character who was in a relationship many years ago with a guy that was in the same foster home as him, and they ended up getting into some drugs, and his significant other ended up developing an addiction, and at the beginning of the book, you watch him drop the other guy off at rehab, and flash forward quite a few years, and he has since moved to Seattle and is kind of not in contact with his old foster siblings anymore and has started a whole new life. And this is told from his POV as well as the other hero's POV, who was in rehab and is a recovering addict. And something happens to one of the other foster brothers, and our hero in Seattle needs to return to his family, possibly remedy some relationships. And it is him and this guy reconnecting, and it is a second chance romance between them. I thought that this was fine. I have very minimal feelings and thoughts about this. I sometimes struggle with a second chance romance because sometimes I feel like the development is all in the past and we are just kind of forced to rely on the fact that these two at some point had this really intense connection. I feel like we're starting the romance in the center because of that. Like we never got any of that like initial connection and background, and we're just like told like they were once in love, and I have a hard time with that. This one kind of fell into that category. It wasn't a bad book by any means. I had a good time reading it. I think I actually read this one in a single sitting because it was only like 200 and some pages. It was a good book. It's not a super memorable one for me. And then I actually have this one physically still, The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy by Bannen. I'm going to preface this by saying I've seen literally nothing but rave reviews for this, but unfortunately I DNF'd this book. I think I DNF'd it at like a quarter of the way through. One, this book is long. It's like 450 pages. I didn't get it. I did not understand anything. You are just kind of like thrown into this fantasy world. And one of the things that was irritating me while I was reading this is there is no description of any of the fantastical things in here. And so you are just like told like the names of these creatures and the name of this location. And I was like, what is this? And like I went and read a review and somebody was like, why didn't I know until the 80% mark that the horses are actually horse frogs? And I was like, I'm sorry, the horses are horse frogs. And I was like, why do we not know that until here? Like, why are we talking about them for 80% of the book, but you don't tell me that they're part frog? Like, and I picture the story in my head. So if you aren't telling me what the characters and creatures and world looks like, I can't picture it and then I can't follow the story. And that was happening quite a bit where I was getting to the point where they were going into this like fantasy section and like they were starting to talk about the history, but there was no descriptions about anything. And I was like, where are we? What is this? What does this look like? Who are you people? And I couldn't get on board. And this was another case of these characters have history going into the book. And I was like, I don't like that. I don't want to be told these characters have history. Here's where it goes from there. Like, I need to know that history. And so they're enemies at the beginning of the book because of this history, or like not enemies, but like they butt heads. And I'm just like, I don't get it. And so this one it just didn't work for me. I wish it did because like I said, everyone I've seen that finishes this book gives it 5 stars. And I wish I was on that train. I was very hyped for that book and it just wasn't for me, unfortunately. Then I had Warriors by Kathryn Moon. This was book 2 in the Librarian Coven series and I gave this one 3.5 stars. I am really invested in this series. This is a really quick read. I love the romance between all 4 of our main characters. I like that we get all of the characters' point of views throughout the series. And I really like that each story in here, this reads very episodic. And so like there is an overarching plot between all 4 books, but each book has its own contained plot as well, which I really appreciate. It makes for a really fast read. It makes for a really interesting, compelling read. And I'm very invested. I'm very invested in these characters and their love story, as well as like the demons and this one had a lot of political maneuvering, which I really liked. So I have the next 2 books already downloaded. I'm very excited about it. After that, we have another DNF, and that was Heartbreaker by Sara MacLean. And I was really sad about this one. I have read quite a bit of Sara MacLean's books, and I've really liked them. But this one just didn't do it for me. I thought the setup and the premise of this was very interesting. Our heroine is a pickpocket, and she came from kind of like the wrong side of the tracks, the wrong side of the river, and she is rescued by one of the other heroines throughout the series. She is kind of believed to be the cousin of this wealthy woman, and so she is brought into like high society even though she has no title at all. She works with this group of women to exact revenge against men who deserve it, and I really liked that whole setup. And I liked how we open up with her going to her father's, I don't remember if it was like a factory or what, but she is there to steal some stuff and she ends up finding this puzzle box. And when she finds a puzzle box, a duke happens to be there to steal the same thing, and the 2 of them have to flee the factory, and they keep stealing the puzzle box back and forth from each other, and she ends up escaping with the puzzle box. And it is kind of her trying to figure out how all of this is tied together, and I really liked the setup. However, the characters were so dull. Like, they were caricatures of historical cliche characters, and it was so obnoxious. So like our heroine was like the dull drab girl who like for whatever reason the duke is just obsessed with, and she has like, you know, a secret skill, and in this case it was pickpocketing. And so like no one notices her, but the duke sees her everywhere and he can't keep his eyes off of her. The duke was super charming and hot and everyone wants him, but he only has eyes for her. And I was just like, yeah, I know, we've done this before. And it was just turned me off immediately. I was just like, I don't want another like dull drab girl somehow is the only thing that this super attractive guy wants. I was like, I thought we moved past this. I thought this was like early 2000s vampire stuff and like we're done with that. And apparently not, because it was back in spades in this one and I didn't like it. I liked the idea of the plot, but I just could not get on board with these characters. And so I had to put this one down, unfortunately. And I don't think I'm going to continue with the series anymore. So that was a bit of a bummer. And then I read A Dangerous Breed by Onley James. I had to go back and double check because I have since read Domesticated Beast. And the fact that they start with the same letters confuses me. Dangerous Breed is book 2 in the Time Served series, and I thought this was really good. I gave it 3.5 stars. It wasn't my favorite of the series. Book 3 is my favorite, but I had a good time reading this one. This is Preacher's story. So we met Preacher in book 1, and in this one, he is out on like a rescue mission, essentially. So he helps the hero for book 1 go into situations and rescue dogs. And so he is there to rescue these dogs that have been reported as being like held captive in this barn. And so they go there. And when he gets there, they find this young boy chained to like a wall. The guy that is in there ends up fleeing. And so they rescue the boy as well as the dogs, and they discover that this young boy is tied to this really, really dangerous motorcycle gang, and that they are going to be coming back for this young boy. And they also learn that this young boy has an older brother that has moved away, and so they contact him, and his name is Memphis. Memphis had a very, very traumatic childhood being attached to this motorcycle gang, and he suffered a whole lot of abuse. So huge, huge trigger warnings for abuse, both child abuse as well as animal abuse. And here, none of it's really on page, but it is referenced a lot. So just content warnings for that. But Memphis ends up coming back to a rescue and try to take care of his younger brother. But once he returns to the hospital, the other brother, who is now like the head of the motorcycle gang, ends up showing up at the hospital and attacks the two of them. And so Preacher ends up like taking the two of them in to try and protect them, and like things go from there. I really liked this story. I thought it was fun. The ending is a little outrageous, which like I can get on board with. I feel like all of Onley James's books have these really ridiculous like action-packed endings, and like I don't hate it. Like I said, it wasn't my favorite. It wasn't my least favorite. It was just kind of middle of the road, 3.5 stars. I read Wild is the Witch by Rachel Griffin, which is Rachel Griffin's sophomore novel. I read The Nature of Witches last year and really loved it, and I loved this one too. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. It was just a really good time. I listened to this on audio and I was just sucked into this world right away. So we're following this heroine who in her past, so right away at the beginning of the book, there's a little prologue. Her best friend tried to make her boyfriend a witch, and that is a very, very dangerous thing to do because they can essentially burst into flames and die. And that is what happens right at the beginning of the book, and our heroine was there to witness it. She ends up being like let free because she had nothing to do with the situation, but her friend ends up going to prison for manslaughter. She is kind of forever tied to this situation, and so her and her mother end up leaving to move to the Pacific Northwest where they can kind of be free of this past. In this world, people know that witches exist, but they're not like out in the world just like doing magic. People just know that they exist. And so now her and her mother are in the Pacific Northwest, and they run an animal sanctuary, and the two of them, their magic is tied to animals. And so they use their magic to get to know the animals and like calm the animals down and like build really strong relationships with the animals. Right at the beginning of the book, our heroine has this enemies situation with one of the other guys that works at the sanctuary. He says something really mean about witches, and she has this little ritual where she will cast a curse onto like an inanimate object and then burn that inanimate object to just like release her anger into the world. And she goes to do that, and she is going to curse him to become a witch because he talks about how much he hates witches. Just as she is casting this onto like this plant, this owl swoops down and ends up becoming the curse. and then he flies away. She needs to get this curse off of this owl because if the owl carries the curse for too long and something were to happen to him, the curse will just go into the void and bad things can happen. She needs to go find this owl and she has to take the guy with her, and the two of them are traveling through the woods, through mountains to try and catch this owl, and it is an enemies to lovers romance. It is so good, so well written. It's the perfect length for this type of story. I loved the ending. This was such a good book. I liked it a lot. 4 stars. I definitely plan to continue reading from Rachel Griffin. Her writing fits so well for this type of story, and I'm all about it. And then we get to my 3 5-star books that I've read right in a row, and I wish I could replicate this event because this was such a good reading week. So I read Lunatic by Onley James, which I gave 5 stars. This is the 6th book in the Necessary Evil series. This is Archer's story, and this is a reluctant friends to lovers romance between Mac and Archer, who have to work together on these like secret projects. Archer has this like reputation for being an alcoholic and a gambler, and you find out in this book that it is all a facade that him and his father have constructed to allow him to do these like secret missions with Mac, and you are following the two of them as they are on one of these secret missions, and Mac has somebody that is trying to comfort him, and they are trying to figure out who put the hit out on Mac and how they can stop it, and it is so good. I loved this book so much. I know this hasn't been everyone's favorite, but this reminded me a lot of why I loved Moonstruck so much, which again is also not everyone's favorite, but there is something about a soft, submissive serial killer. Helicopter interlude. And this was that. Like, Archer was like a little puppy that just wanted Mac to take care of him and like tell him what to do, and I was living for it. I loved it so much. So I gave that one 5 stars. And then I read Mercy by Sara Cate, which is the 4th book in the Salacious Players Club, and we all thought that this was going to be the last book. But Sara Cate came through, and we are having 2 more books in the series. This one is following Beau, who was the ex-boyfriend in book 1, and he is finally getting his romance. He hates the club. He hates the sex club that his father runs. He sees it as being very dirty and wrong, and in this one he is learning to embrace his sexuality, embrace kink, and all of the things. You are also following him with our older heroine, who is the last like owner of the club, and she does not believe that she has a kink either, but it turns out she is a dom and he is a submissive, and the two of them kind of get into this relationship so that they can explore their kink and see if it works for them, and it is so good. I know a lot of people were like, I don't know if I could read Beau's romance. I was on board from page 1, man. I was like all about it. I thought this was so well written. This has some like amazing lines in it. I loved it a lot, and I'm so glad that we are getting 2 more books in that series. I am going to go through this really quickly because I'm running out of memory. The last 5-star book was The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandanna. I've talked about this ad nauseum, but this book is a must add to your fall TBR. Like, please, right now, go pick this up. Read this fall. It is so good. This is essentially House in the Cerulean Sea meets Practical Magic, and it is the cozy, witchy romance that we've all been waiting for and we've all wanted, and it is just so good. Our heroine is a witch, and witches exist in the world, but they need to kind of stay separate because if too many witches come together, the magic can kind of start to swarm around them and it can cause bad things to happen. But at the beginning of the book, she gets asked to come to the Nowhere house where these 3 young witches live, and they need somebody to help them control their magic. And so she agrees to go there and help teach them how to control magic, and it is a fun family. There is a grumpy librarian who wants to protect the young girls and doesn't trust our heroine Mika. It is an enemies to lovers romance between the two of them. It is grumpy sunshine. It is cozy and soft and adorable, and I cannot recommend this book enough. I can't stop raving about this book. It is absolutely fantastic. So that is all 10 books that I read recently. Let me know what your last 5-star book was, and I will catch you all in my next video. Bye!